Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider once again with you. Glad you can join us. We are live on Wednesday nights, and I know we've got a couple of different platforms for people to watch us now, whether it's live at SB Nation Cincy Jungle or as usual on our YouTube channel. So please check us out. We'll fire those links out just again momentarily to you on our social media platforms and whatnot. But I am joined after being a terrible twosome for a while. No offense, Scott. We've got our trio back. I'm gonna let Connor kick it off. And Connor, how are you? You've been the world traveler, and you've
Yeah,
been
I've been good. Still jet lagged. It's weird because I've been gone for so long. I left like right when I got off the plane and I saw, oh, Pac-Man Jones got arrested. I was like, I picked a good time to leave.
yep, yep. But picked a good time to get the Bengals, put the Bengals behind you a little bit. What? Just real quick, you went to Italy. What areas of Italy did you go see?
So I went to Naples, and that was fun visiting family. And then I went to Spain, and I was in Madrid for about a week visiting my brother.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I mean, you can probably tell by my name, I'm part Italian. I've never been to Italy, though, unfortunately. So I hope to go out there one time, sometime in the near future. But that's awesome, man. Welcome back. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Scott, I was obviously saying tongue in cheek, the terrible twosome. You and I held down the fort, I think, pretty well, even though our
It was
comrade
just
wasn't with
good.
us. Yeah, that's right. How are you doing? You feeling better this week?
Yeah, everyone in the house is pretty good. Just got done playing with some wooden train tracks and magnetic
There you
trains.
go.
Ready to try the transition from that to Bengals talk.
Yep. Hashtag dad life, right? There you go.
Totally.
Well, yeah, yeah. You got the bachelor who's out in Italy here, and you're at home doing the train thing. That's awesome. That's awesome. Anyways, guys, welcome back to both of you, and thanks for those of you who are tuning in. Scott, I'm going to kick it off with you and with the positional assessment, since this was kind of your baby, and then obviously I want to get some of Connor's thoughts here. Kind of a lot to digest, and obviously this is going to segue into our next topic as well, but we'll get to that momentarily. We've got Drake Kirkpatrick entering free agency after a pretty sound season with the team in his second full year as a starter. You had two guys sign an offseason contract at the safety positions, and after slow starts by George Aloka and Sean Williams, they ended up picking things up at the end of the year and actually coming up with some pretty decent seasons. Obviously, some decisions to make here. What's your overall, I guess, grade of the unit, both corners and defensive backs, and maybe talk about the priority of re-signing Drake Kirkpatrick amongst other guys that are going to be hitting free agency in other spots for the team.
Gosh, it is so hard to give them a grade because they just had seeing both the defensive back coordinators leave with Mark Carrier and Vance Joseph, and obviously now Vance Joseph is head coach for the Broncos. They seem to start slowly, but they really seem to pick it up later in the year. And I know part of that too comes from pass rush. Obviously, the better pass rush you have, the easier it is for the defensive backs. And the pass rush, for whatever reason, just didn't seem to be there this year. So if I was to give them a grade, I'd just say, I don't know, I'd say B minus. They definitely weren't the unit they were the year before. They definitely lacked the interceptions. Reggie Nelson seemed to have a ton of them, 7 or 8 last year that they didn't seem to be able to replace. But overall, one of the interesting things is going into this season, most people probably would have said that the cornerbacks was the strong position because you had Drake Kirkpatrick, Adam Jones, you just drafted William Jackson, you still had Darqueze Dennard, who was finally going to get his chance. At least that was, in theory. You had Josh Shaw, come in a second year. You had some depth behind them. And then at safety, after they lost Reggie Nelson, all you had was George Aloka and Sean Williams, who they just re-signed, who really hadn't started much. But by the end of the year, it seemed that the safeties were the stronger unit because you had George Aloka, who had another solid year. Sean Williams, who I thought started really slowly. I mean, probably after the first half of the year, I was ready to dump him and just say, let's get someone else back there. But I think he seemed to turn it on, especially in pass coverage. He just seemed like a major liability to begin the year. He seemed to get much better at that. I think he led all defensive backs in tackles and tied with 3 interceptions with Kirkpatrick and Iloka. So I think he got better. The one thing that kind of worries me going into next year is definitely the cornerback position, which it really shouldn't, because you consider that's all they do is draft cornerbacks.
Yep.
But yeah, Drake Kirkpatrick, you mentioned him being a free agent, and I'll let you guys talk a little more about that. If we should re-sign him or not, I think obviously, given how shallow the position could be, it seems to be a priority, especially depending what they decide to do with Adam Jones. But worst case scenario is they could be entering next year without Drake Kirkpatrick and without Adam Jones, which just leaves you, as far as experienced cornerbacks, Darqueze Dennard, who can't seem to crack the starting roster, Josh Shaw, and then outside of that, the next four guys have a combined 0 tackles. Kaveri Russell, William Jackson III, Shaky Brown, and Tony McRae. If you look at the official roster per Bengals.com, the guys who are on there, you have 4 guys with no tackles last year, and then Dennard, who doesn't seem to be progressing the way you would have hoped a first-round draft pick would, and then Josh Shaw, who I've been a fan of Josh Shaw. I think he's done a decent job. I don't know if he's starter material, but yeah, I think a lot of that just points to the need to go after someone like Kirkpatrick. And then you look at the safety position, which going in probably looked like the weaker, shallower position beginning 2016. Sean Williams and Georgia Aloka, obviously they're starting. They're both in their mid-20s. They are locked up for a few more years. You kind of feel, okay, we're probably pretty good as far as our starters go. And then you have Deron Smith and Clayton, the kid from Illinois they drafted last year. Both of them got playing time, special teams and on defense. And so, as silly as it sounds to say, since they just used a first-round pick on a defensive back, depending on what happens with Kirkpatrick and Jones, wouldn't it be horribly surprising? It'd be very frustrating, but wouldn't it be horribly surprising to see them early in this draft take yet another cornerback?
Yeah. And, you mentioned Russell, and kind of a funny stat. He had more interceptions and tackles, which is one. And it was in that final game there, which was good to see, in the wake of injuries. And he was a former third-round pick himself, that was released. So, I mean, obviously some teams thought pretty highly of him. Connor, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on Drake Kirkpatrick. You've been really supportive of him, and I would say rightfully so this year. I mean, he really stepped his game up. You saw Adam Jones, just strictly right now talking on the field. You saw a little dip in play there, both at cornerback and as a return man. There was a little bit of a dip there. You saw some ups and downs and ebbs and flows from guys this year, but all in all, I mentioned the improvement of the safeties. You saw Drake Kirkpatrick kind of step his game up, especially towards the middle end of the season. Russell had that one brief kind of nice moment against Baltimore in the finale there.
One pick on one snap.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's 1 for 100% right there. I mean, that's awesome. And then you've got William Jackson III coming back. Even number one, I guess I want to ask you, are you encouraged by that group without Kirkpatrick and maybe Jones, as Scott mentioned? And number two, if you're not, how big of a priority then is Drake Kirkpatrick to get back for this defense?
I mean, I think either way, even if Jones was gone, Kirkpatrick should have been. I mean, just you look at the Bengals' mentality in free agency, and they're always an outside-in type of team. I think Jeff Hobson kind of talked about that earlier this week in one of the columns he wrote, and that Kirkpatrick might actually be a bigger free agent, need for the Bengals than Zeitler. Even though Zeitler, most people would argue has been the better player, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But you look Whitworth is a guy that is probably a lot easier to get a deal done with just because of his age. Zeitler's a guy hitting the peak of his career, and he was a first-round pick, and he's played really well. So he's going to get a big contract, whether with the Bengals or elsewhere. But with the secondary, you have, even if he's back and none of this offseason stuff happens, you have Adam Jones, who is up there in age, second oldest corner in the NFL, I believe, behind Terrence Newman. And then, like you guys said, it's pretty untested behind him. And so I think, and to Scott's point, I agree with some, but I think I disagree with a lot in the sense that I think that the safeties going into the year, I thought were the better position group than the corners. Obviously, Sean Williams was kind of untested, and that was definitely a major issue. But I mean, you look at the interception numbers from last year and the year before, and 2 years ago with Reggie Nelson's 8 picks, they had 21. And Scott mentioned they didn't really have anyone who had a ton of interceptions this year, but they after being third in the league with 21 picks this year, they were fourth in the league with 17, losing Reggie Nelson. And I think as we saw with the Raiders, he wasn't really the player this year that he was last year. I think most Bengals fans probably anticipated that. Sean Williams really stepped up. I think he was the better player than Reggie Nelson this year. And ultimately, the move they made was a move for the future, not just for this season alone. So I think that was a really encouraging sign. But back to the corners, which is kind of what we've been talking about. I think Dre's just a guy that you have to get done, regardless of how you feel about him. It's just it's a mentality of locking up your best guys, and I hope Zeitler stays too. I think it's definitely possible and should happen that he should stay, but I don't know. I think it's way easier to justify spending money on a cornerback than it is on a guard, just because, especially even the way the Bengals have operated, it's something that would make sense. And they have, at the worst, they have Christian Westerman or Whitworth can kick inside, or they can find something. They have bodies, but at corner you really don't have much depth or experience. And there's guys we've seen bright spots from Shaw. We saw Kivari Russell 1 pick on 1 snap. I don't think it's going to happen for the rest of his career, but
Probably not.
it's just, yeah. I mean, it's a high standard to meet, but I think that you guys kind of hit the nail on the head in that it's not really a battle tested position, and it's definitely going to be a big need if Dre Kirkpatrick ends up courting another team, because he's a playmaker. And I think the argument against Kirkpatrick, if you're saying, if you're an anti-Dre guy, which there's still a lot of people around Cincy Jungle and other Bengals sites, I think the only thing that people really use to quantify against Dre is his penalties, a perceived inconsistency, and Pro Football Focus's grades on him. But the positives being he's one of the best press corners in the NFL, who is not targeted very much at all after last year being one of the most targeted corners in the entire league. And Pro Football Focus doesn't grade the snaps that the guy doesn't get targeted. And so you look at a game and Dre Kirkpatrick gets targeted 3 times when covering an Antonio Brown or DeAndre Hopkins, whoever it may be, and he doesn't always play the best receiver in the world, but there have been several games this year where I counted he was targeted like about 3 to 5 times or less. And when you look at a Pro Football Focus grade, it only counts those 5 snaps towards his rating, even though he's made so many. He's covered his guy the entire game and plays 60 snaps, whatever it is. I don't know how many snaps people play. And so I think ultimately what it comes down to is just with Adam Jones. I think Adam Jones's whole off the field stuff really made it more apparent that the Bengals need to re-sign Dre Kirkpatrick, because it just his on the field play, it wasn't really drastically declining. It really wasn't much of a difference from the year before, even though he was a Pro Bowler the year before. It was kind of reflective of, okay, he's another year older, and
Yeah.
the Bengals didn't lock up guarantee a ton of money towards him, so he's an expendable player, like him or not. For the record, I don't really have an opinion on what the Bengals should do with Adam Jones, but I think regardless of that, you have to sign Dre Kirkpatrick. I mean, you drafted him high. It took him a while, but he's where you wanted him to be at the end of his first contract, and that's really what it stems down to. Is that he's where you want him to be at. So why not re-sign him?
Yeah, and I see here's the thing that I see, and that I'm potentially excited about. One of the things, unfortunately, he wasn't as great with it last year as he was this year, and I'm talking about Kirkpatrick, was the big plays, the returns for touchdowns, and he didn't have any interceptions in his first year as a full-time starter. He had, I think, what did we say, 3 this year.
He's had 3 every year except the last year, I think.
Right. And you remember when he was kind of a part-time / fill-in guy in 2014, I think he had 2 return that year. I mean, he's had a handful of returns for touchdowns in his career. This year, the Bengals defense, whether it was the secondary or the defensive line, linebackers, nobody had a return for a touchdown. Now, granted, those are plays that are rare in the NFL. You don't always get those, but when you want to have a dominant defense, you have to have guys that can make those plays, whether it's a scoop fumble all the way, whether it's an interception return for a touchdown. Those things change games. And when the team loses by, I think it was 7 games or 6 games by 8 points or less, those are things that really could change an entire season, those types of plays. So,
yeah,
number one, I think Kirkpatrick, we've seen, has the ability to do that. And I think if the Bengals want that big playability on defense, which I don't see why they wouldn't, he's a guy that I think should be a very high priority to resign. Connor, you mentioned his often success against Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown's had a couple of good games against the Bengals as well, but last handful of games,
and
I think
Dre doesn't get burned ever. Like I watched the tape. I mean, the Bengals play so much too high safety coverage, and him and Adam Jones, like them or not, both of them have been very, very good at not giving up the deep ball. Jones struggled early in the year. I remember the Broncos, Emmanuel Sanders torched him one play. But for the most part, they've both been really good with limited safety help, which is a lot to ask for of a corner, which when you're comparing Dre to a Stephon Gilmore or AJ, super familiar with the Bills or the Texans' defensive schemes, but I would guess the Bengals are one of the teams that most frequently uses too high safety coverages, which really doesn't help the corner out, so they're asked to do a lot more than other corners. So
yeah,
that's another plus for Dre.
they're left on an island a lot, and that's just the way the scheme has been. It was like that in under Mike Zimmer as well, but I think some of the issues with deep balls that might have happened earlier in there was also because there was a new starting safety back there in Sean Williams.
Definitely.
You could tell there was miscommunication. That being said, I think Dre Kirkpatrick is a high priority to re-sign because of his potential big playability, his length, and his ability to get into the chest of a receiver off the line. The other thing I'm really excited about is the return of William Jackson III, and this will segue into our next topic, but depending on what shakes up with the roster this year, what moves are made, what moves aren't, I think the sky is the limit for this kid. I think he's super athletic. It's a really big bummer that he had to redshirt with an injury this last year, but he probably, just based on who they had veteran-wise, wouldn't have played very much. Even so, I think his role this year is going to probably be a bit more high profile. Maybe even if you get, if you move on from one particular player we're going to be talking about and you re-sign Kirkpatrick, who knows, you could have Jackson and Kirkpatrick as your starting corners next year. We don't know. But lot to be happy about with the secondary. I think as we said, it was encouraging that there was more there was improvement as the year went on, and you saw the points drastically drop as the year went on against opposition. Scott, did you have an additional thought?
Actually, one thing I was just going to ask, just something you kind of hit on. Assume if we lose Kirkpatrick and/or Jones or neither, if we were to pick right now, who do you guys think the Bengals starting cornerbacks are for 2017?
Denard and Shaw, and Kivari Russell, some combination of those three. Or maybe a first round draft pick again. I don't think it's going to happen, but I would say that Denard would definitely be on the outside. I would say Kivari Russell would probably be on the outside and Shaw in the slot.
Yeah, I think they give, in that case, I think they give Jackson a shot at starting. And it's probably some combination also that Connor mentioned with Russell and Denard.
I forgot about Jackson. Jackson might be starting too. Dang.
Yeah, I would.
Even more difficult.
Yeah, I would say they'd have to give a shot to Jackson to start, and I would not be surprised if he does get some chance to play heavy snaps this year. If his knee it was his shoulder, I believe.
I think you hope so regardless. I mean, he's a playmaker.
Yeah, and you saw it in college, and his workouts were unbelievable, if you remember. Great showing at the combine and things like that. So let's move on, though. We're still going to talk about corners. And Connor, you kind of mentioned you're a little indifferent on this, so I'm gonna lean on Scott initially here for an opinion here. So for those of you who do not know, Adam Jones has had another run-in, and we talked about this a similar question a few weeks ago on the podcast, but there's been more developments on this story since his arrest on January 3rd. So Just briefly, if you want to check out the chronicling of the stories, you can go to Cincy Jungle. We've got a lot of different stories on it. Basically, Jones was belligerent and was, after being kicked out and escorted out of a casino in Cincinnati, was then pounding on doors in the Millennium Hotel in downtown Cincinnati, was then arrested, supposedly spit on a law enforcement official of some kind, had some words exchanged with the arresting officers, and unfortunately now the video of him in the back of a squad car has emerged, and he was not saying very nice things to the police officers who arrested him. So one of which was he's going to get the guy fired, and I believe that I hope you die, and just awful things to a member of law enforcement. So we asked before, Scott, should the Bengals move on from Adam Jones after just initially hearing the incident and actually getting arrested based on age, a dip in production, and the track record? While it's been better in Cincinnati, there still have been some brushes with the law, and obviously his very checkered past with the Titans and Cowboys and whatnot. Now with these new developments, what is your opinion, and has it changed from a few weeks ago?
Yeah, mine has totally changed, because a few weeks ago when we first brought this up, my position was we don't know everything yet. I don't want to rush to judgment just because it looks bad until we actually know what really happened. Well, now we've seen the video. We know it's really happened. We know what he was saying in the back of the car. We know he was spitting on the nurse in the jail. We know the things that he was doing. And you kind of pile it up with everything you mentioned he did before he came here, when he was initially with Tennessee, and then between, after his time there. It's not like this is a one-time incident or kind of an outlier. It's basically a pattern of behavior that really hasn't changed. You mentioned it got a little bit better when he got to Cincinnati, but unfortunately, it just seems to keep popping up. And I know you can probably argue, yeah, but just watch the show Cops. People get crazy all the time when they get arrested, or if they're drunk, they're belligerent. Yeah, whatever. But it's a little different when you are a public figure, and you are a face of a franchise. I guess every player in a sense is a face of a franchise. If this would have happened to a third stringer or someone on the practice squad, they'd probably be going the same day as soon as it pops up. But because he is a starter, he is someone they need on. Marvin likes his veterans. They seem to be holding on to him, and I don't know if it's I don't know his contract that well. I read somewhere that there could be a different cap hit if they wait till June to cut him. But then if you do wait till somewhere like the summer, you can't really say, well, we're cutting him because of this incident. The incident happened in the beginning of January. You can't wait 6 months and say, okay, now we're cutting you for something you did 6 months ago. You mentioned earlier as a parent, I couldn't punish my kid, a week later. Like, hey, do you remember a week ago when you broke that? Okay, you're being grounded now. Yep. It makes no sense. If they are going to cut him for this, it's one of these things. Okay, you have the evidence. It doesn't matter what the league's going to do. That should be totally separate. If they're pressed charges or not, but that's based on other things as far as evidence and what they could have in a court. This is just, there's got to be some sort of stipulation, I'm sure, personal conduct kind of a thing. It's obviously a pattern. It's something that, and from my perspective, it just gets to a point where you just have to move on. And the interesting thing was I went to the Bengals website earlier today, because I figured we were talking about this, to see, okay, have they said anything about this? And obviously, they're not going to air their dirty laundry, but I was kind of curious. And I saw a headline on their website. It said the kids are watching. And my first thought was, oh, they're mentioning this. They're mentioning how obviously kids watch Adam Jones. He's a member of the team. He's a starter, a higher profile player, especially on defense. It makes a team look bad, when and they realize that teams are watching what's happening and seeing he's not getting punished and seeing on TV all the bad things he was doing. Instead, the article had nothing to do with Adam Jones. It was just about Senior Bowl prospects.
Yeah.
But yeah. So my short answer, long answer cut short, is I think, you just have to let him go for multiple reasons. I mean, you could argue the decline, the salary isn't matching what he's probably going to give you next year. If you try to track what he was very, very good 2 years ago. This past year, he wasn't bad. I thought he was decent. but he is what 33, 34 now. When the season starts, he's going to be obviously even older. And you do have these conduct issues, and you don't know. Okay, let's say we keep the guy, and then the league suspends him for half a season or something. What does that really buy you? So for all those reasons and many more, I'd just say, yeah, I'd say my position has changed. It's just time to move on.
Yeah. You mentioned the cap hit, and there's been some reports of, if they cut him now, it's like 1.2 million of a cap hit, and then if they cut him later, it's more like a 600,000 cap hit. And to me, if you do plan to cut him, and I don't know what the Bengals' reasoning is for sitting on their hands with this, maybe they're continuing to monitor it. Maybe they are wanting to save just $500,000 or $600,000, which in the scheme of NFL teams is not very much money. That's just not a lot of money. My thing is to avoid more PR nightmares. I think I would kind of spend more and say, let's do the right thing here and get rid of him. And I supported Adam Jones last year after his blow up in the playoff game. And I said, even with that, these are the types of guys you want on your team because they're passionate, and especially on the defensive side of the ball, they can be a little mean, and those are the guys you want. But to me, enough's enough, and the age, the salary, the headaches, the PR nightmares, it doesn't equate. And I defended Jones last year, but I wasn't a fan of the contract the Bengals gave him. And now it seems to me, and Connor, you're kind of riding the fence on this a little bit, but the impression that some people maybe in that locker room or outsiders can get is, well, this guy's been a pretty solid player for us. We can accept this type of behavior given that they gave him a contract extension after the wild card blow up last year. And now they've waited 3 weeks to make a decision, which is indecision at this point.
I mean, it's you sign Adam Jones and he's an unpredictable guy. It's just kind of what you signed up for when he became a good player on your team. But I don't know. I get what you guys are saying. I'm just going to kind of play devil's advocate here, but I really, truly do believe this, and I'm not just trying to be Skip Bayless here. I think the Bengals, what does this prove? We all knew Adam Jones has a pattern of doing stuff like this. That's just the kind of person that he is, and I don't want to judge him for it and try to make assumptions upon who he is. That's not my place. But we all knew that there was a very high possibility that Jones, more than anyone else on the team, would have some sort of incident like this at some point during the 3-year contract that he signed. And I totally agree with you, AC. I think the Bengals overpaid for him regardless last year. They paid him $7 million a year, and he was one of the oldest corners in the NFL. And I think that so far he really hasn't underperformed in terms of his contract. Obviously, though, you don't want this PR nightmare like you guys have been saying with Adam Jones, just screwing around and everyone's calling him names and people are generalizing and saying, oh, well, look at the team that employs Adam Jones and Vontaze Burfict and Dre Kirkpatrick, who both have nothing to do with it, but of course their names come up because they're also players on the Bengals and they are more than not controversial, I guess. It sucks and it is what it is, but I think from a purely football standpoint, number one, I get the team. It sucks, but I at this point, as of now, between now and June, there's really no point to cut him because if the Bengals were going to make that statement, they should have just done it right after the news came out. I think doing it right now doesn't prove anything more than if you wait till June because there's nothing between now and then anyways. And then, there's the draft, but if you're cutting Jones in June, you're going to cut him, and so you don't have to plan your draft around that. But I think the video thing really makes people uncomfortable. It kind of happened with Ray Rice and the pictures with Greg Hardy. It makes fans uncomfortable, and it's definitely something that shouldn't be taken. I think it gets taken more seriously incidents like these when there is some sort of video or pictures involved. Last year Sheldon Richardson drove a car 120 miles per hour with a 12-year-old and a bunch of weed and guns in the back seat, and he got suspended for one game, and no one ever talks about him as one of those guys per se. But incidents like these happen, and I don't think it's right. I think it's disgusting and bad and wrong what he did. But if you're looking at it from, the perspective of Mike Brown, I wouldn't say it's necessarily excusing him and saying we paid him so he can just do what he wants. I think the team is definitely disappointed and frustrated and hopefully disgusted with what Jones did. But I think that I mean, if you cut him, you're making your team worse, and it's costing you money to do it. You're gaining, I think, like your net gain on cutting him is like $6 million, but you have less money to spend this year, and you could wait a year and cut him next year, and there's zero dead cap for the last year of his contract. And so I don't know, just devil's advocate, but I still kind of do believe this. I can get why the Bengals aren't cutting him, and I think that where they're at now, I think cutting him when the news came out would have been a move I wouldn't disagree with then. I think that would have been a fine move to make. But at this point, you're kind of where you're at, and so you're kind of stuck in that area, and you have to make a decision. And I think their decision isn't as much indecision as it is just sticking. I mean, I wouldn't say sticking with him, but I think it just you just let. I mean, and that's the thing is that the NFL still hasn't punished him. He still hasn't been, I don't believe, punished like judicially, and so I don't know. It doesn't really. I get that the gut reaction is to say cut, 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 but and I don't think it's wrong that people believe that. I think it's totally fair where people are coming from because it's frustrating to see one of your favorite players do this. And he's a captain. And granted, I think the whole he's a captain argument is a little flawed because the players elected him and the coach just let the players elect him. He wasn't going to take that away from Adam Jones. But I think that it is what it is at this point, and that's just kind of where I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
Scott, do you have some to add?
Yeah, just one thing I just want to mention that in the Yahoo live chat, I thought Aaron Siegel had a good point about the message that it sends to the younger players, especially if you look at Marvin Jones' big thing is all, or Marvin Lewis's big thing is all about veteran leadership. And he likes keeping the veterans around, the guys who aren't very productive, but he considers good in the locker room. The Vontaze Burficts, the guys he can depend on, rely on. Well, this Adam Jones thing kind of runs contrary to all that. If you want to have these good veteran presences, the guys who take the younger guys under their wings, who kind of help mold them into the Marvin Lewis way, where you practice really well and, you're a good presence, there's nothing about this in Adam Jones' past that seems to jive with that. So Marvin Lewis just needs to decide. Is he serious about, I want good, solid veterans who are good people, varied, my kind of person, or are we going to revert to the days where we tolerate that nonsense?
Yeah, and you took the comment out of my mouth. I was actually going to mention Aaron's comments, so thank you for bringing that up, Scott. There was one other interesting comment that just came up from Nick Marks. Would love to know what the locker room thinks, obviously, of this situation. That would be if you were to be a fly on that wall and get a candid answer. I think that would be very interesting. My thing with this, I see both sides. I do. I see, I'm not a guy who likes to make examples out of people, but unfortunately, sometimes it needs to be done. And this just seems like a good way to cut bait with a guy. I mean, he's been with your team for a while. You've had him through basically his best years already, and they appear to be behind him. I just think that, enough's enough. And especially after a 6-9-1 season where you're going to, Marvin Lewis has preached change and things are going to look quote unquote vastly different this year. This seems like a good opportunity to do it. And, I don't want to see a guy lose his livelihood for his family, but he's also making poor decisions in his personal life that affect his family, when he's going to prison and in and out of court and doing that kind of stuff. Sometimes I don't know. You just gotta cut bait with a player that isn't towing the company line, so to speak. What do you think, Bengals fans? You can get in touch with us a number of different ways. We're live every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Cincy Jungle and on YouTube. You can check us out either way. We've had comments in the YouTube chat already and some fan questions being shot our way, so we appreciate that, and we'll wrap the show up with that. You can also download our show on iTunes, SoundCloud. Again, I mentioned YouTube. All of our content is available there. You can get in touch with the show via Twitter at Bengals OBI, or you can email the show, theobinsider@gmail.com. Please get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. And when you're on downloading those shows, leave a rating, leave a comment. We love to hear back from you. Appreciate it. Speaking of Marvin Lewis, guys, it's that time of year. It's Senior Bowl, and it's time to talk about Marvin Lewis and contract extensions. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your take on Marvin Lewis and the taste in your mouth after a 6-9-1 season, Marvin Lewis via the Cincinnati Enquirer and Jim Ozarski there. I'll start, Connor. I'll kind of throw these comments to you and get your thoughts. Let's see. It says Lewis, who's 58 years old, will be entering his 15th season with the Bengals in 2017, and told the Enquirer on Wednesday he feels good and would love to continue to chase the organization's first championship beyond just this coming season. We'd like to agree on something at some point, Lewis said about a desire to receive a contract extension. It puts, I think, everybody's mind at ease going forward for their futures. A lot of people in the building, it makes it easier on them. Let's see if there's not really too much else about that, but what we've seen, Connor, is we have seen this team give Marvin Lewis these kind of little rental deals, these extra 1 or 2 years on his current contract. They've done that a lot of times during the offseason, and sometimes it's after a crushing playoff loss. Other times it's been after a season like 2010, when the team had a really poor season, and I get where the team is coming from in terms of continuity, but again, with maybe hanging on to Jones, and then you're rewarding a coach with a further contract extension after a 6-9-1 season and 0 playoff wins and 7 tries. Is that the right message to send to your fan base?
15 tries. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I kind of hit on it after the Bills game was really what did it for me last year, and I went on Facebook Live afterwards, and I think Rebecca framed it as the Marvin Lewis should be fired, and I think that my opinion after that game was more so just the Bengals need change, and Lewis isn't the guy that's going to bring change. And I don't know. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. I don't know. I can't say I've followed the team closely enough in the past to tell you if he has often said that the team is going to drastically change. But I think it'd be interesting to see where the questions are coming from, because Jim is a guy who is asked a lot about the Lewis extension. He seemed to get really agitated when people were Cincy Jungle was talking about that Chris Cooley report that I don't even remember what happened with that. I don't even remember what that whole thing was, but I remember he went on Reddit for like an entire day and was just railing on Cincy Jungle and everyone else who talked about that, as though there should have been no even reason why we should have talked about that, even though it's kind of like we're a fan blog, and so we can talk about whatever Bengals related stuff happens. But the whole morality of that aside, I think that the framing of the question is important, because we don't know what Jim exactly said. We don't know if he said it as if it was just like oh, hey Marvin, do you think you're going to get extended this year, or if it was a kind of mid conversation, and then Marvin, it's not Lewis just straight up making a statement to Jim. It's always important to remember he got asked, and so I don't know, maybe he just said it as though he hopes that's what happens, but he doesn't know, and maybe he does know, and it's more of a just, well, I hope, a sarcastic, I hope I keep my job, kind of like how Bill Belichick says, the Twitstagram and Snapface and all that stuff. I mean, coaches are people, so maybe he's just being sarcastic and screwing around. We really don't know. So I don't know. I think if you're asking me right now, should Lewis get extended, the answer is no. I don't think that means he should just get fired right now, but I'd like to see the Bengals make him work for another extension. I really don't think there's any harm in that. But, it's the Bengals, so I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens. But I think if the question is, should he be extended right now, the answer is no.
Okay, and then just a quick follow-up question then for you, Connor. Would it surprise you if they did give him a small extension?
No, and I wouldn't hate it. I mean, you can always cut ties if you really believe that you need to cut ties. And who knows? Maybe he already got an extension. It wasn't announced. I mean, that's probably didn't happen. But we really don't know, and they don't have to ever announce that stuff. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm pretty indifferent on the whole Lewis thing at this point. I know it's frustrating that he still doesn't want a playoff game in 15 years or whatever it's been. And the Bengals are a talented team whose window is wasting away and all this stuff. And I don't know. I've been gone for a month, and so I feel like I'm not as attached. And I kind of like it. I kind of like it in a sense that I feel like I can be a little more objective in the whole. I'm not being super frustrated by stuff. But at the same time, it's just kind of just like, well, regardless of how you feel of him, Lewis is a middle tier or better coach. He is a good coach who I would hope for his sake could. I mean, like I said, when the Bills game happened, which really just frustrated the heck out of me. I would have loved a Kyle Shanahan hiring and Lewis going to like the Jags and turning them around, because I could have totally seen that happen. And for the record, which is completely unrelated, I think Shanahan's going to turn on the Niners. I think I tweeted they're going to make the playoffs in the next 3 years, which is kind of crazy, but I think it's going to happen. I really bought Kyle Shanahan, and now the Falcons are in the Super Bowl. So maybe I was right, maybe I'm completely wrong. Who knows? But I think that change would be awesome, regardless of whether or not it makes the team better. Just make it more exciting at the very least. And a guy like Shanahan, or just another young guy like Sean McVay, Anthony Lynn. I don't know if Lynn's young, but he's a first-time coach, or one of those guys. It would have made things interesting. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, I guess, to answer your question 30 minutes after you asked it. But I mean, it's just kind of the Bengals at this point, and I feel like I've come to accept it, which is kind of frustrating, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah. I think obviously they're trying to emulate the Steelers in some form, with continuity at the head coaching spot after they had the 1990s and early 2000s with a bunch of head coaches, bunch of quarterbacks, and I think they like the continuity they've built at some critical spots, but it's only gotten them so far. Scott, you found some other quotes in the article quite interesting. Yeah. Which one stood out to you?
Well, after writing about Marvin Lewis's press conferences for last year, you kind of detect a disturbing trend that when he kind of answers things or points out things that give you a very large SMH, you're just kind of, geez. But I thought that was kind of done when the season was done until I saw this article. And the first one was when Marvin Lewis was asked about the contract that you and Connor were talking about. He talks about how he thinks it's good to have it because it puts everyone's mind at ease going forward, and it makes life easier for the people. Well, it shouldn't be. I'm sorry, but 0 playoff wins in 15 seasons, as Connor alluded to. You shouldn't be at ease. You should be on edge. That should be something that's driving you, that's pushing you, and you shouldn't be saying, okay, yeah, you're 0 for 15. Let's here you go. Here's another. Here's another round. At some point, you need to not be having an easy seat. If you're not achieving what the team in theory wants you to achieve, which is playoff wins and ultimately a Super Bowl. And if you're not doing that, you should be on a hot seat. You shouldn't be having it comfortable. And so that's one of the complaints people have is, it's a little too comfortable. It's too easy. If he wins, he loses, if he wins, he loses, whatever. He just gets extended for another year and on we go. Another thing was
to my previous point. What if he's just being sarcastic? I mean, Bill Belichick said he didn't know who he was playing in the Super Bowl next week, like yesterday. I mean, we really don't know. What if he's just screwing with Jim or something? I mean, I don't know. I get where you're coming from, but what if he's just that's just Jim saying that I mean, I don't know. That's my take.
Well, it didn't sound like a joke to me, but I mean, I suppose coaches like to do the coach speak. But go on, Scott.
I just wish there was an interview. That's all.
Yeah,
like a video.
When then he makes they asked him about Adam Jones, and during the year, whenever any of the players did anything on or off the field, his typical answer in the press conference was either, "Oh, I didn't see it. I'm not aware of that. I don't know." And it was more the same. He said, when they asked him about the Adam Jones, his thing was, "Oh, it's not my comment to make." And then they mentioned on Friday how the club issued an apology. And I'm sorry, but if you're the head coach and all the players are reporting to you, you can at least have something to say. At the very least, I don't approve of it or I disagree with it. Something to tell the fans, especially the younger fans and people who are looking up at these guys, that you do agree or disagree. I mean, you have to have an opinion about this, obviously, if you are, in theory, the top dog. Everyone's reporting to you, and I don't get, why is the club, apologizing for Jones? If Jones is truly sorry, he's the one who should be apologizing. You shouldn't have, the club. They should be firing him, not apologizing for him.
Yeah.
The other thing he said that kind of drove me crazy was
I think I know where you're going with this one, but go ahead.
Well, there's two more. I'm not sure. One is about the Tyler Boyd.
Okay.
He made the comment that he says, I would have liked to got Tyler Boyd out there more, seen more from him. And it's so frustrating because they said that every year with the rookies who they don't play. They criminally underutilized rookies. They said the exact same thing about Tyler Eifert his first year. Oh, yeah, we should have used him more. Every single season. Oh, yeah, Drake Kirkpatrick's first year. Yeah, we would have liked him had him out there more, but we just couldn't squeeze him in. Well, I'm sorry. That's nonsense. If you want them out there, you can put them out there. And after 15 years of that track record, it's the same thing every year. We don't play the young guys. We don't play the young guys. And then at the end of the season, oh, yeah, I wish we would have played the young guys more. Well, I'm sorry, but if you can't figure out how to do that after 15 years, you're just not going to do that.
If you say change, then that could be a change one. Like
maybe he will turn over that new leaf. And
Maybe.
The very last thing that drove me crazy was this is a team that builds the draft. They don't sign priority free agents. They sometimes will let their guys walk. They don't pursue the pricey guys. They kind of sit out the first week or two of free agency. The guys who are more of a threat to losing the compensation picks. They don't go after those guys. They kind of wait till free agency settled down. They get the guys later in the period. The Carlos Dansby, the Brandon LaFell, the guys who you can still sign and you're not going to worry about losing, your compensation picks because you're building through the draft. They're not building through free agency. They kind of use it as a stopgap for different guys when they signed AJ Hawk, the year before. And so that being said, they're obviously trying to acquire draft picks because they're not signing free agents and they're trying to build up those picks or letting the guys walk. Then he's asked about adding, how they're going to have as many as 11 picks this year in the draft. And his comment to that is, well, I'm not really sure how we're going to incorporate that many rookies into the roster. And granted, that is a lot, but if you don't think you're going to be able to add 11 people in there, why are you making that your strategy to get all these compensation picks and get all these picks and then turn around and say, yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to use them all. And if it's truly, then go after the free agents and don't worry so much about the compensation picks. Yeah. It's just very aggravating because that seems to be their strategy. And then he makes a comment that, yeah, we really have no plan to follow our strategy.
Yeah.
It's just more Lewis being Lewis.
I see what you're saying. I mean, that could be a little hint of, maybe we'll move around in the draft. Maybe we might make player trades. I don't see how, this team doesn't need 11 rookies unless they do absolutely nothing. And I mean nothing in free agency, which they do at least a little something, but they don't do, they re-sign their own guys and then they, get a couple of older guys. But, I don't see especially when you're getting into, if you have a comp pick in the fourth round, you got 2 picks there and all of a sudden, a 7th round guy. I mean, you don't want to count anybody out, but at the same time, it's hard to see that. My thing, I thought you were going to touch on it. To me, it's a lot of it means we weren't good enough. It means we weren't good enough to win the games. It means last year we didn't do a good enough job. You want to talk about aggravating, Scott? That is 15 years of not good enough. We didn't do, what was wrong with today? We weren't good enough. We just weren't good enough. The coaches didn't do a good enough job. Well, when are they going to start doing a good enough job?
Yeah. Another one. I kind of skimmed over that one just because I harped on that so much during the season. Whenever they lost, that's what he says is, oh, we didn't execute. Did you?
Yep.
No, we had a game plan which didn't execute.
Yep.
Did you adjust? Adjustment. I have no idea what.
Well, he
what
doesn't.
Language are you speaking? What is that?
Yeah, he doesn't believe in those. We talked about that a couple shows ago.
And you mentioned the draft, and my first thought was when he said, I thought the same thing too. Oh, okay, they're going to trade up. They're going to adjust picks. But it's the Bengals. You know, how often do they actually trade up? And when they do, it's Kajana Carter and Russell Bodine. So I'd like to think that his comment was, yeah, we're going to trade up, get some high impact players. I don't think the track record shows it, but yeah, we'll see.
The track record definitely doesn't show it. But anyways, that's kind of our take, and also some news and notes both about Adam Jones and Marvin Lewis, and him possibly talking about getting a contract extension with the Bengals. We'll see. He is signed through this season. I think we all are kind of in agreement, it sounds like, that if the Bengals are going to keep him, and they definitely are for 2017, we'd like to see him play this season out without an extension. And really earn one, I think, was kind of the main theme that we had here. But you can let us know what you think about the contract extension and on Twitter at BengalsOBI, via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We're also on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube, and available on Cincy Jungle for download. So check us out in all of those areas if you are on those platforms. Gentlemen, we are going to end the show with a handful of fan questions. Connor, you got one. I don't know if it was in our YouTube chat or not, but we talked about Adam Jones, and if the Bengals were to lose Adam Jones or get rid of Adam Jones, given his legal run-in recently, if the question you received, I believe, was if Jones gets cut, should the Bengals sign Morris Claiborne? And you have thoughts on that?
That was in the comments from a guy named Brandon. And I think the easy answer is no. The Cowboys tried to make Morris Claiborne a right cornerback early in his career, and that didn't work out because Brandon Carr at the time was the high-paid guy who came from Kansas City, and was their left guy. The left guy is kind of generally where it seems the more dominant player plays, and so eventually they just this year they tried swapping them, even though Claiborne was kind of the lower paid guy who I think he signed a 1 year, $3 million prove-it deal last year. And Carr was the veteran who should have been playing better. They just decided to try switching sides. And what do you know? Claiborne was way better on the left and Carr was way better on the right. So it worked out for the Cowboys. But my point being, I could only see the Bengals probably signing Claiborne if Drake Kirkpatrick were to leave. And I still don't think that would... I just don't. I think also just position wise, I think we touched on it earlier, but if the Bengals were to just, let's say, go on a spending spree in free agency, I don't think corner would be the position to do it. It's definitely one where you can get a bargain. Last year, the Chargers got Casey Hayward, and that was a huge deal. They got probably the best slot corner in the NFL for a bargain bin contract. But I think that for the Bengals, you have all these guys, and we just spent, an entire segment talking about how you want to see the Bengals change and play their younger guys. Well, the Bengals have Denard, who hasn't played a ton, Kivari Russell, and William Jackson, and even Josh Shaw, who all four of them really haven't gotten that much playing time. So even if the Bengals were to lose Adam Jones and or Drake Kirkpatrick, you still have four guys who are at the very least high draft picks who haven't had enough sample size to really show whether or not they're good or bad. And hopefully they're not such like a Wahee growing pains type of caliber growing pains. But I think if you want change, I mean, that's definitely a great place to start. So short answer for that one is no, but good question.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Scott, for the sake of time, we got one more that is kind of up your alley here. It's from Cale Smith. It was at the beginning of the show in the YouTube chat. One question I have for tonight is all this talk about Randy Bullock being a priority for the Bengals. I mean, come on, we might as well throw a little money at Greg Zuerlein or Stephen Hauschka. Bullock has absolutely zero clutch in his veins. Do we really want to end up with someone who has hit less than 50% of his kicks in clutch time? Say what you want about the Nuge, but at least he could make some kicks with the game on the line. Well, Nugent, yeah, he made the one in the Jets this year, but he missed quite a few clutch ones this year. But there have been others in the past that he has hit. Your thoughts on you're particularly intrigued by Zuerlein because Hauschka seems like a little bit of a stretch given his track record and what he might command in terms of a kicking salary. But your thoughts on those two and Randy Bullock for that matter?
Yeah, I think of the three, I'd definitely put Bullock as the third choice. Hauschka, I think, has a great track record. He's been very successful in Seattle. He kind of bounced around his first few years. After that, he's something like, I don't know, 90% as a field goal kicker in Seattle. Uh, Hits from distance, he's hit 2/3 of his field goals beyond 50. The one thing that might make him expendable for Seattle is he's very Nugent-like, and he's missed 10 extra points his last two seasons. And as much as the Bengals fans hated seeing Nugent miss field goals, if we went and signed, paid decent money for a kicker and brought a guy in who was missing field goals, I just think the fans would riot in that regard.
Yeah.
But
83% on extra points last year. Dang.
yeah, I mean, he's been horrible for the ones he's supposed to be making, but he's been very good for his career, with the actual field goal, especially long ones. Zierlein is a guy who I really like as a kicker, just because he has a monster leg. And you look at a team like St. Louis, who doesn't have a whole lot of offense, who doesn't move the ball a whole lot. You're not getting a ton of chances.
Los Angeles.
You have to. I mean, he has to do, get his points without getting a whole lot of opportunities. And you look at how many 50-yard field goals he's attempted in his career because his leg's so strong. He's attempted 35 in 78 games, which is almost one every other game, which is insanely huge. And especially for a team that doesn't give you a lot of field goal opportunities. I mean, he's only getting the last couple of years, in the mid-20s. I mean, 3 of his 5 years, he's getting 20, 25 field goal attempts. So to get, to be able to get 30, half of your every other game, you're getting an attempt beyond 50. That says that this guy has a heck of a leg, and he's make about half of them. And if you take out all those attempts from 50 yards, he's pretty much a 90%er inside of 50, which is pretty good. And I think he just goes under the radar because he plays for a crappy team. They don't move the ball. He doesn't get a lot of kicks, get a lot of points, and his overall average isn't always super high because he is attempting so many from distance. So he's someone I'd love to see. I mean, he has a very strong leg. He's proven it throughout the years that he can kick the ball. He can kick it pretty well. So of the three, he's the one I'd like to see. That being said, the whole thing about making Bullock a priority, it's one of those things like the Second Amendment. There's a lot of ways to interpret it. So I think, when the Bengals say he's a priority, are they saying that the position's a priority and they're going to start with him and then see where that goes because they can get him signed now and just get him under contract, make sure we have a warm body there? Or do they mean that Bullock himself's a priority, and as soon as they have him signed, they feel, yeah, we're set for the next 3, 4, 5 years. He's our next Mike Nugent. I'm hoping it's not the latter. I'm hoping that they aren't saying, Bullock is the priority, because I'd love to see either them go after Zierlein if he becomes available, or one of those kid like the kid from Duke, Ross Martin, or the kid from UCLA who came out this past year, who I think currently could be available. Or I think Martin might be on the Jets, but I think he might be someone they
Martin's
could
a
get.
free agent.
Yeah, or Zane Gonzalez from Arizona, or Arizona State, somewhere out in the Southwest.
There you go.
Can't remember if he's a Wildcat or Sun Devil, but there's definitely opportunities for guys there. I'm just afraid with the Bengals' history they wouldn't do that. But yeah, I'd love to. Of the three, I'd say I'd love to see him get Zierlein and just work down from there.
I think to be fair to Bullock, he only had 8 attempts on the year and he made 6. He missed that huge kick, and it's not an easy kick to forget. But for the record, last year he made 88.9% of his field goal attempts, 90% of his extra points. He had a better extra point percentage than Hauschka, better field goal percentage than Zierlein, and then worse than the other two, or just the other way. So then he was also worse than Zierlein at extra points and better than worse than Hauschka at field goals. But I think that his percentages, and it's just a really bad year for kickers. I think Zierlein's an exciting guy that I would definitely love to see in Cincinnati, but Hauschka, as good as he's been, is 31. Phil Dawson's up there. He's 42. Robbie Gould can't kick from past 30 yards, it seems like. Nick Novak is kind of a has-been. He's 35. I have no idea how he got that old that fast. Connor Barth is there. Awesome name, but he was 78.3% on the year last year. And then Zach Hawker is the only other who was with the Bengals last year, I think on the practice squad or didn't even wasn't even on the roster. He's the only other free agent kicker. So really not a lot of big names on the kicking market this year. There's no Justin Tucker or anything like that. So I mean, you hope the Bengals have a competition. I think they will, but I really wouldn't hate a Bullock signing. I mean, there's really not any flashy competition. I think the Bengals' reasoning for not signing Ross Martin has to be legitimate if there aren't any other teams of the 32 teams in the NFL that are interested in signing him or another guy. I know there's certain names that just get hyped around Cincinnati, like Ross Martin was hyped, and people loved Bud Dupree because he went to Kentucky. Just certain guys like that who fans will never forget. And it was cool because Ross Martin gave us time on Cincy Jungle, and so I understand why people love him. And I loved Rashawn Simonides. I think a lot of fans got on his train or Jake Kumro's train because there's just certain guys who people start to root for whatever reason. But I mean, at the end of the day, Randy Bullock missed like one huge kick, and aside from that, he wasn't really bad. And so, yeah, that one was on primetime TV. Yeah, that one was a game winner against his former team. Like, you hope he makes that kick, but if that was just a normal kick, or if he made that one and missed, another kick and had the same numbers, I don't think fans would be nearly as critical. So I don't know. I'm kind of indifferent on that.
The one thing I'll say is, even though Zerline may have a little bit of a leg up, look at that pun work right there, on Hauschka.
Legatron.
Yeah, the Legatron. There you go. In terms of some stats, Zerline, if I remember correctly, Scott, has you kind of accidentally said St. Louis, and they moved to LA this year, but he did kick in St. Louis for the past couple of years, which is inside a dome, and obviously the weather that you kick in Cincinnati in the AFC North, you have to kick in some brutal conditions much of the year, and that's why I actually value a guy like Hauschka more than some of the others, because he's kicked in some brutal conditions in Seattle as well. But I think both of those guys, Hauschka and Zerline, probably top the list of kickers that Bengals fans would want to see. We've got one more question before we get out of here, guys. And it was, I believe, sent to you, Connor. I believe it was through Twitter.
Yeah, I think it was Going Deep Radio.
Yeah, and
they were the ones who sent it.
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask that one. And Scott, if you have any additional thoughts, go for it.
Yeah, I'll try to get this out of the way quick. So, has Andy Dalton ever made the Pro Bowl as something other than a replacement selection? So, for those of you who missed it, Dalton just made the Pro Bowl as an alternate. And should he play with the injury risk? I don't know. I would love to see no Bengals want to play in the Pro Bowl, but you're not going to really stop them from doing what they want to do. So it's a meaningless game, and sometimes you get hurt, sometimes you don't. Tyler Eifert got hurt. I keep saying this. I said it last year. Tyler Eifert got hurt in the same game that Richard Sherman took an end around for negative 20-something yards. That sucks, and it happens, but that is what it is. You can't really control it, and you hope that Dalton plays. The good thing for quarterbacks is that he's going to play like a third of the snaps or less probably, and then he won't really have any other chances to get hurt. And teams are pretty easy on quarterbacks in the Pro Bowl, so I think it'll be okay. I don't think there's any reason to worry. That's not to say he won't ever get hurt, but I think the worry level isn't as high as if a guy like Eifert played in the Pro Bowl. And then the initial part of that question was, has he ever made it as something other than a replacement selection? And I don't believe he has. We all kind of talked about it before the show. He made it in 2011, 2014, and now this year. So 2011 was his rookie year, and he made that, I believe, as a replacement for someone. 2014 was the year that we were looking. Nick Foles had that huge year. Andrew Luck made it, I believe. Phillip Rivers, maybe. Tom Brady. The AFC's always, and Foles I think was the NFC, so I don't know why I said his name, but Alex Smith made it from the AFC. It was kind of Dalton had a big year that year, but the AFC was pretty loaded in terms of quarterbacks that year, so there were a lot of names that even got omitted from the list. I don't think Peyton Manning was on the list, and that was the year that he blew up with Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker and Julius Thomas for that monster season at age, I think, 39. So, I think it's cool that he made it, and it's still something to work on to make it as something other than an alternate, that you make it in the first cuts or whatever, before the final cut or whatever. But But yeah, I don't think there's any concern. It should be fun. I would tune in if you're into that type of stuff. I'm personally not, and I have things to do other than watch uh, Geno Atkins play dodgeball in Florida. But for those of you who are interested, it should be fun.
Yeah, and in terms of injury, it's a little different when you're kind of an outside position player or something like that where you're getting tackled. They tend to ease up on the quarterbacks in the game, and I think that's kind of intentional there because they don't want the faces of the NFL really getting hurt. But you mentioned Eifert, and that really hampered the team early on this year. And in typical Bengals fashion, it was, oh, whoops, we kind of misdiagnosed. But there was one. I said we had one more, but there was one more final question. We'll get to it kind of quickly for all of us. It was from Waldo in the YouTube chat, and it was, quick question, guys, just because in Cincy Jungle, 8 out of every 10 fan posts are mock drafts. Who do you take in round 1 if Reuben Foster, Mike Williams, Derek Barnett, and Corey Davis are all available? Scott, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, first off, I'm really excited we found Waldo. I've been looking for that guy for years.
Oh my gosh.
But I'd say if we were taking one today, and obviously this is before the combines, before the pro days, before anything like that, I think if we were picking one, it's probably going to be Reuben Foster, Mike Williams. If Mike Williams has the clocked 40 speed that makes people salivate because he has the size, the body control, the hands, I could see him being the pick. Otherwise, I'd say as of right now, of those names, it's probably Reuben Foster because he's probably the best player available as far as where he grades relative to the position, relative to the other people in that list.
Okay. Connor?
I would say I like Corey Davis more than I like Mike Williams. I think they're pretty much the same guy. I just personally have a preference for Corey Davis. I think he's awesome. He's so much fun to watch. Just really quick on Reuben Foster. He's an awesome player, and he'd be so much fun. He makes so much sense for the Bengals, and plug him in next to Vontaze Burfict. I think one thing that makes him so unique is that people always think about the Bengals as a 4-3 team. They're really a 4-2-5 team. They play so much nickel, and it's really gonna, with the Bengals, it's really gonna come down to, with Foster in the first round, is do they believe Nick Vigil is the guy opposite Burfict in the nickel? And if they do, there's really no reason to take Foster, because then you're kind of limiting what Nick Vigil can do on the field and how much time he's going to see. But I think that Foster is an awesome player, and he fits what the Bengals want to do, because he's a guy who can drop into coverage because he's quick and he can blitz really, really well, which is what the Bengals don't really have a lot of edge rushers who bring a lot of pressure, but Burfict has sneaky been a very, very good blitzer. And the Bengals kind of look for that in their middle linebackers. They've oftentimes sent Vinny Ray on stunts with the interior defensive lineman or another linebacker in that sense. And I remember an easy sack where Gilbert just tried towards the quarterback untouched because Gunther dialed up a perfect double A gap blitz. And so having another linebacker alongside Burfict, like Reuben Foster, for those double A gap blitz packages or whatever it might be, it makes so much sense. I think another guy to look out for, I don't want to take forever, but I think Taco Charlton, if he has a nice combine, he fits what the Bengals want, and I could actually see him skyrocketing up boards. But for now, I would say Corey Davis over Foster. I think he'd be so much fun. I love Foster, but I think the Bengals like Vigil. So,
Connor, you weren't here the past couple of weeks, and we were kind of doing a lot of draft talk. And my thing is with this pick at number 9 is you have to get a great immediate impact player, and you still have to get value while getting a best player available type of deal. I like Derek Barnett, but what we've talked about the last couple of weeks, a lot of people consensusly put him as the number 3 or number 4 defensive end. Now, defensive ends are highly coveted positions in the NFL and by teams, but is the value at number 9 overall there if you're getting who is deemed as the 3rd or 4th best defensive end prospect in this year's draft? I don't see that. I think the consensus number 1 linebacker is Reuben Foster. in terms of a true kind of linebacker that in the middle of the field, not an edge rusher linebacker. And I think whatever you think about Mike Williams and Corey Davis, they're kind of 1A, 1B, right? I mean,
the pick of the litter at receiver too.
Yeah. So to me, if Mike Williams is there and Reuben Foster's there, that is a hard decision to make.
Sure.
I just, I think when you saw how the team played down the stretch this last season, the defense wasn't really the issue. And this is something I'm going to echo. The pass rush improved. You saw their games where I think they let up more than 19 points once in the final 7 or 8 weeks. And that was against the Steelers. And the rest of them were like in the 18, 16, 14-point range. So they were holding teams, even though the Bengals weren't a great team overall last year, they were holding teams to low amount of points. And then, with your issues with Tyler Eifert in terms of injury, AJ Green has been pretty durable throughout his career, but he's missed some time now. This offense can't afford to keep those same guys and just rely on those same guys and not have other great ancillary weapons. And I think even if you re-sign Brandon LaFell, you have Tyler Boyd, you hopefully have Tyler Eifert, even though he had back surgery, you have Green, you have Williams, and you do some things in free agency. I think that would be very exciting. I do see your point about Foster, though, Connor, and you had one last thing to add before we get out of here.
Yeah, I just think it's something Connor alluded to about the idea of having Burfict and Reuben Foster out there. And if we believed in Nick Vigil, I think one thing that can't be overlooked is with all the concussions, injuries, and suspensions Burfict's had. I mean, he's missed a lot of games the last few years.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Very well could be that Foster not so much would be there with Burfict, but in place of Burfict. So it could be Vigil and Vigil and Foster as those two nickelbacks with the idea that, hey, in a couple years we may not have Burfict anymore.
I just don't see it. I think though the idea of Burfict next to Foster, two of the NFL's most aggressive linebackers next to each other, would be just for like
that would be silly.
The whole purpose of like Cincy Jungle and making it fun. It'd be so much fun, and people would perpetuate the stereotype of the Bengals being this like dirty whatever team all the time. But I would just relish in it because it like having two ultra aggressive players who are like if I was gonna compare not play style but like everything, like personality, play, like not quality of play but like kind of play style, I would say that if anyone was going to compare to Vontaze Burfict, it would be Reuben Foster, in the sense that they both are guys who can blitz well, they both drop into coverage, they're both extremely aggressive, and he just reminds me of Burfict in that way, and so he's such an exciting guy, and so I would the first thing I would do if he got drafted was to think of a name for. I need to think of that just before, in case he does get drafted.
Let's say they draft him on Madden 2017. Who do you use, Burfict or Foster?
I use Burfict, but he's my boy. But I think that you have to find some sort of way to group them together as a tag team. That'd be so much fun.
Well, they would provide a mean-looking defense. That would be for sure. And I think, and
then Vigil needs to bring back the rat tail. Sorry.
Yes, that's for sure.
Continue on.
That's for sure. The rat tail needs to make a comeback. But, a lot of those options that Waldo mentioned, the Bengals really couldn't go too wrong with a couple of those, I don't think. They all seem to be pretty talented guys. And obviously, workouts and things like that have to be played out. You guys, we are going to get out of here. You can download the show, as I've mentioned earlier, on iTunes. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel for our video content. You can also subscribe to our SoundCloud channel for our audio content. We are live every Wednesday on Cincy Jungle and YouTube, and you can get in touch with us via Twitter at BengalsOBI or at email theobinsider@gmail.com. Guys, it was great getting the crew back together for the first time in about a month, and appreciate all the insight tonight, guys.
Yeah, I'm just excited. I think the sun's asleep, which means wooden tracks and magnetic trains are free.
There you go.
So if you guys want to come over and play those, I have some open trains.
I'll catch a red eye right now, buddy. All right, guys. For the Orange and Black Insider, I'm Anthony Kazenza. Thanks to Connor Howe and Scott Schultze. Hoo day, everybody.
Good day.
Who they?